Thank you for attending. You've made it to the panel for founders' perspectives on generative AI. You might have been able to tell by the slightly baggier trousers and more bags under the eyes as well. Thanks for sticking with us. I know this is the end, and many of you probably have your eyes on the pub. But I think that with probably everyone on this panel has an interesting perspective to add, and I hope that you find it as useful as I'm sure that I will, and the rest of the panel. My name's Harvey. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Alive Industries. We also have a spin-out called Alive Robotics, which is a teleoperation application for robotics systems, mainly humanoid robots. We're just closing our pre-seed round. If you want to hear more about how we're bringing remote work to physical labour, feel free to grab me after. I'll hand over to the rest of the panel to do the introductions, starting with Romain on my right. I'm sure they'll do a much better job than myself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So I'm Roman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called StackOne. StackOne is an integration platform for AI agents. So our customers are typically B2B SaaS companies building agents for enterprises, or the enterprises themselves building AI agents for things like recruitment, customer service, and other functions. And these agents need integrations to the various systems that the company has, like a CRM, an HR system, the document storage, et cetera. And that's what we do. We help them to connect to these systems. We've been going for 2.5 years. We've raised a $20 million Series A earlier this year, led by Google Ventures, and we're backed by Workday Ventures as well. And my background before StackOne is that I worked in product at Google and in B2B SaaS companies. I had 2 exits before. So yeah, excited to be here. That's over to you.
I'm Zoe, one of the co-founders of Amble. We're building a conversational AI platform for people to come in and learn foreign languages. So like very much in the consumer AI space. Like Roman, been at it for around 2.5 years. Raised a seed round last year, at the back of last year, of like 3.5 million, backed by Shine Ventures and South Park Commons. And I think like our main thesis is that like we're living in this age where we can have a personal tutor in our pocket, and we can have an AI, especially with voice AI, teach us a different language. So like that's basically the thesis which we're betting on as we're building this company.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Ahana. I'm the founder and CEO of Clear, which is a Y Combinator-backed beauty tech company. So we have a free app that essentially helps consumers figure out which skincare products to use and whether they're actually working. We do this with users uploading pictures of their skin, logging the products they use, any medications they're on, and we aggregate data across tens of thousands of consumers to predict which products will most likely work best for them or not. I started the company while I was doing my physics degree at Imperial. I always wanted to be a founder. I'm a technical founder. I didn't really see a path to doing that when I was at university because I had no money and didn't know any investors. But very long story short, Y Combinator invested when I was halfway through the final year of my physics degree, which is ultimately what enabled me to drop out and start my company in my master's year. And by that point, my career in physics was already over, so it didn't really matter. So I've been at it for almost 5 years. At this point, we've grown organically to 50,000 users. We spent the first couple of years very, very product and tech focused. It doesn't really sound like an AI company, but I promise you it is, and that is the core of our business. And so we're now at the point where we're scaling our B2B side and also growing our user base. The app is free, so feel free to download it after we're done.
I think I'm actually going to start with a question which I hadn't planned, which is always a great idea. The reason being, I think I've been able to drop into a couple of panels, and who is shaping this technology has been a huge question, and the intentions and the values of the people that are shaping this technology has often been discussed, and the question has been, what's the intention and what are the motivations behind pushing this technology? And I think sometimes founders in the early days are treated with a lot of leeway, and you know you're doing a good thing. You're supported. It takes courage to go out and do that, and you're very much supported. But then when you make it, everyone questions your intentions and the impact that you're having on society, particularly when you're shaping a technology. So I'm actually going to ask each of you, why did you found a company, and what is it that drives you to? What was it that drove you to found your company or be entrepreneurial in general, and how do you fit that with the impact that you want AI to have in the world? Maybe we can start with yourself, Anne.
Yeah, so for me, there's actually quite a clear, excuse the pun, answer to this. And it goes back to my childhood, and I'll try and keep it brief, but I lived in the UK, in Cheshire, till I was 14. And at the age of 14, my family and I moved to New Delhi, India, and I am of Indian origin. And when I was 16, we moved to Singapore, but I think that it was that big transition when I was 14 years old, where I went from a regular state school in the UK to suddenly this very, very privileged international school environment where my peers' parents were CEOs of companies, ambassadors to their countries. And so while experiencing privilege like I had never seen before, I was also witnessing poverty and suffering like I'd never seen before. And I think in particular, being of Indian origin, there was that added layer of, I look like these people that I'm seeing suffering. What did I do to deserve this life, have this access to this education, these teachers, these kinds of schools? And I think, you know, I was old enough at that point to kind of understand what some of these privileges meant. And not to say I'm the most privileged person in the world, but I always kind of felt that I had this unfair advantage of my education. And the way that I thought you could empower people and solve problems was through innovation and through science. And so that's what made me want to study physics. I thought that that's how I could, you know, solve the world's big problems. Again, it's a bit of a long story, but when I finally got to university, I tried a bunch of different internships, some in software engineering, some in finance, and I really stumbled across entrepreneurship by chance. But it was the first job that I did that I felt, as somebody who could code, but also loved talking to people, understanding why people do things, it was the way that I could maximize my personal impact using my skill set, my education, my background. And for Clear specifically, you know, when I decided to build it, it was also about answering the question of what is a problem that I understand very, very well, and what is a solution that I can build better than anyone else, than your average software engineer. And I have had really terrible skin. This had been an ongoing journey for me for 10 plus years, and it still is. If you come closer, you'll see. And so, you know, I really understood who my consumer was because I am my target consumer. And to put it crudely, how many skincare enthusiasts are also software engineers that want to build a company like this? And so, you know, that was it for me. I knew that generally tech entrepreneurship is what would play to my strengths and my skill set and how I could maximize my impact. And I feel very rewarded in what I'm building because now I get to say that I am helping thousands of people with skin like me on their skincare journeys.
Like, there's a lot of overlap here in some ways. English isn't my first language, so I was born in India and moved to the UK when I was like in my teenage years. And you know, like when English is not your first language and you move to a country where everyone around you is speaking it, there is like a massive advantage everyone around you has by default because they can like communicate with each other in a way you feel you can't. So I taught myself, you know, English when I arrived here, and like eventually went on to teach myself French and Italian, and like eventually got my British and Italian citizenship. But when I came here, I realized like that there are millions of people out there for whom just the fact that they could speak English could change their lives and like give them opportunities, which I was lucky to have. There is also the element of, very similar to Hannah's story, that founding a company is, especially when you're straight out of university, is probably the best way, at least I feel, to maximize impact. Like my original plan was to go into a policy role, so I studied international relations. And I realized that you have to wait a ton when you start your career before someone tells you, now you have permission to make an impact. When you start a company, like you don't actually need anyone's permission, like it's just you. and like the impact you can make is only dependent on you person. So those two things kind of came together. I spent 2.5 years at Spotify before I started the company in voice AI. And the timing just felt right. Like voice AI had advanced to a stage where we could have a personal tutor in our pockets. And I always wanted to build something in education, especially in language. So a lot of things just came together. And in 2023, I left my job to start a company, despite like loads of sort of late nights and like a load of ups and downs. Definitely no regrets there.
Awesome. So this is my second business. So the reason I start businesses is because I'm a terrible employee. So I don't tend to do well staying at companies for a really long time. What motivates me is that I'm not actually an engineer. I'm self-taught. I've just learned to code when I was younger and always really enjoyed technology. And I started building websites in my teenage years and really enjoyed the process of selling and commercializing the technology that I was building. With Stack One, the idea actually came because I met my co-founder 12 years ago in the first company that I ever worked at, and I loved working with this guy. He's like, I call him my work soulmate. I am married to someone else, but he's my work soulmate. And we founded our first business together. We worked in 3 different companies, and when I left Google, he was also available. This felt like the perfect time. We actually iterated on so many different ideas before founding Stack One. I looked into building a sustainability AI app that could measure carbon emissions of clothes. And I remember we had some really terrible ideas until we really found Stack One was the best fit because we'd experienced that problem as well of building, kind of similar to you guys. We were the first customers of this product. Like we'd experienced the problem of building integrations, worked in pretty big, large-scale software companies. And my work at Google was touching on LLMs, and it felt like a major shift in the technology that was available, and we wanted to apply that, have a go, essentially, kind of similar to the way you positioned it, is we had a thesis that this was going to enable us to create a new kind of integration platform. We didn't exactly know where it was going to go initially, but luckily we found a market for it.
Amazing. A disclaimer that not all founders are such great people, just the one that Cassidy invites to speak in this panel. My own story, I was worked within the content moderation team at Meta. That fundamentally changed my view of the world. I didn't see it as such a good place anymore. But what I did feel was that there is a zone of influence which you can control, and I will try and bring as many good people into that zone of influence and grow that zone of influence as large as possible. So what really motivates me is to build a company that doesn't mistreat people the way that I felt like Meta did in certain places. Not necessarily all by maliciousness, but also just being intentional with the impact that you want your technology to have. And in order to ensure that the next wave of technological innovation is well-intentioned, then I want to get myself around that table and in order to give my voice there. And the best way to do that is to build a technology company that needs to be invited to the table. So that's broadly my motivations. And I think it's interesting that all founders have different motivations for starting a company. I'm also a terrible employee, but that's broadly mine. Moving on to the next question, many of you in the audience probably saw the report that MIT, I think it was, released earlier this year that 95% of generative AI pilots don't achieve a return on investment. I think there are many reasons for this. There's the old adage that technology is underestimated in the long term but overestimated in the short term, and I really think we're experiencing that now with generative AI. But potentially, Romain, you have some thoughts on how you foresee people ensuring that they do get ROI out of their projects, and what it is that has maybe driven so many generative AI projects to go wrong. I know that in your role, you're probably working with many companies that are piloting generative AI and trying to get the relevant context into the models. So from your perspective, what is it that's really driving that misattribution of resources, let's say?
Yeah. I think there are some criticisms of that specific reports, but I think broadly the sentiment of the report is right, and I've observed it as well, that a lot of companies say they want to do AI and then nothing happens, or they spend a lot of money and nothing happens. So what we've observed with our customers building agents typically is that if there's a clear use case with a estimated impact of, if we improve X, then we're going to gain more revenue, we're going to save money, we're going to speed up the time of onboarding our clients, retain more employees, etc., then typically those projects are successful because they're a traditional. It's not new, right, to build this kind of projects within companies. It's just generative AI typically hasn't been the solution for it, but now it is. And so what we're seeing is that if the use cases are well defined, and there's a team dedicated to achieving that metric, maybe it may not succeed initially, but if you do it as a cheap pilot or cheap enough pilot and you iterate on it, at some point it will succeed, right? So I think those types of generative AI spends and projects tend to succeed. The ones that don't, in my experience, are the ones where there's a blanket, do AI mandate from someone in leadership, and they're saying, we bought you a Copilot license, and so now you don't have an excuse anymore to not do AI. And that generally doesn't work. Why? Because I think that the adoption is not great. B, people don't think that way, right? Workflow automation platforms, Zapier, et cetera, have existed for a long time. That doesn't mean that all our work is automated. The same way that Copilot, and not everyone uses it, and then that same thing doesn't mean that everyone's going to automate their work all of a sudden. So I think there needs to be really a strategic drive behind it before companies see success. And I think that there was a big hype initially on generative AI is going to help us to actually, one of the things that did the most disservice to generative AI adoption in general is positioning agents as an employee, like an alternative or an extension of an employee. We have a marketing agent, we have a finance agent, we have a recruitment agent. It's not helpful because I think it sets the wrong expectation that there's some kind of autonomous, conscious being that's artificial that's gonna all of a sudden talk to all my candidates and do a great job at screening them. Whereas I think that if you think about it as, okay, we have this clear process where we get 5,000 candidates per week that apply to our jobs. Today we have, we spend, our 10 recruiters are spending 50% of their time on this, when instead I'd rather that they did more interviews or they responded faster, or to improve my candidate satisfaction score. That's a clear goal that you can have. That's a clear metric, but the agent itself is a small part of that bigger project. You need the humans to do something around it. It's a long-winded way to say that I don't think it's new. I think it's just a misunderstanding of how to use that tool. But if it's structured in a way where you have a clear goal and you apply that technology to solve that goal, in general, I see those projects succeed a lot more.
Yeah, I agree very much. We were joking earlier about some of the best AI engineers that we've worked with. The telltale sign being that they tell you that this isn't an AI problem and there's a more deterministic way of doing that. The only way that they can tell you that, though, is if you have a clear process that you can walk them through and explain how, this is the inputs, these are the desired outputs, these are the risks, and these are the key stakeholders. Once you have that mapped out for any process within your company, it becomes a lot easier to start trying to get some value out of it using AI, if AI is the answer to automating. You might find that there's a route through that data that doesn't require AI interpretation. I'm interested to come to you next, Zoe, because as I understand, I think your app's more B2C. So do you think it's easier to help end users get ROI out of generative AI in a B2C setting than a B2B setting? I know that your previous startups that you've looked at have been maybe more B2B, and potentially with when we're trying to learn new knowledge, the alternative is that you go to an expensive language tutor, and it's a bit easier to show that ROI to an end user. Do you think that that's the case, that it is easier in a B2C setting?
Yeah, I actually, I think this is a great question for consumer founders as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone did a study and found that 90% of people downloading AI apps had like a very similar problem that like they would download it, and like this is the classic, you pay before you can even try it, so you pay for, and like somehow your finger goes and like hits the annual subscription, like you've paid $200 to this like AI agent which was promising to like help you become a completely different person, and the next day you stop using the app. And I think there is like the sort of desire to overpromise, like doesn't just exist in like B2B, it's also very prevalent in B2C, but we have like another problem in consumer, is that consumer founders, we generally have more permission to just toy around with the technology. Like it's not generally common to hear advice in B2B saying, go build a toy and see what people do with it. Whereas in consumer, that is somehow the mentality. And so especially when you're technical, you get obsessed with the technology and like all the different things you can do, but at the end of the day, you still need to solve a problem for someone. And so I think we have seen this sort of AI hype cycle play out with consumer apps as well. And like, frankly, a lot of people have made a lot of money just like sticking AI onto apps. Especially the indie devs. I think we've all seen like, those people posting on LinkedIn who've made like 2 million ARR and like they're 18 and like just dropped out of university. But I think in the long run, the same sort of like general rules of, company physics apply to B2C companies as well. And you have to solve a problem in the end. For us, the problem is very clear. Tutors are expensive, and tutors aren't really the most convenient way for most people to learn a language. They're also out of reach for a lot of people. But we're not actually as focused on replacing tutors for people who can already afford them, but sort of like lowering the bar so that people who previously didn't even have the tutorship option can now actually achieve that with like a much cheaper solution on the market. Yeah.
I heard so one of my investors described it as B2C companies monetizing curiosity, because I think it's a lot easier to just try things a lot in B2C, and like you have a freemium or something like that. Do you see that trend of like getting like just users trying it and then just dropping out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with AI especially, like a lot of people, we here are extremely probably AI focused. And so we've tried these AI tools a lot more than the average person. But a lot of people, when you show them that their ChatGPT app can have a voice mode, are extremely shocked. And they're like, wow, I didn't know I could speak to this AI. Many people have not even tried ChatGPT. And for us, that's very hard to imagine being so obsessed with it, but that's just the reality. And so when you tell someone that here's an AI language tutor, which is just could just be ChatGPT without a wrapper, and you tell them you can chat with it and it can help you learn a language, people will pay. And eventually they will discover that there are free options out there. But in the meantime, you've made money. A lot of people are sort of hopping on that gold rush right now. That's just not sustainable long term.
And then just coming to you, Ahana, if you've basically got a B2C and a B2B offering that you're exploring at the moment, if you notice differences in how those communities try and contextualize their ROI, and if potentially maybe as people not perceiving you as an AI company, if that helps you to actually demonstrate that ROI a little bit more, because the promise is maybe potentially a little bit lower, and actually it's quite nice to be solution focused rather than technology focused in your offering.
Yeah, I think we are definitely a solution focused kind of company. And the solution is different for all the different stakeholders. So for the consumer, it's what I mentioned in my introduction. It's a freemium app now. We've just launched a premium tier where consumers can get these recommendations, they can track their routine, etc. And I've never been the kind of founder to jump on a trend for the sake of it, because when I started Clear, it was all about Web3. Now I've seen this Gen AI wave and people tacking on technologies and creating problems that don't need a solution. And so seeing all those companies get a ton of funding and then die very quickly thereafter, I made sure that that was not the approach that I took, and I stayed focused on what is the problem I'm solving, as you said, Zoe. And so for us, the average beauty consumer does not really care specifically how that recommendation is being made. Interestingly, there is an added dynamic when it comes to skincare specifically, where people don't actually want a black box, just here's what you should use, because the question is always, well, why? How? Like, how can I trust this recommendation? And if you look at the existing consumer behavior, when you ask someone, why do you use the moisturizer you use? Why do you use the cleanser you use? It's always, oh, my girlfriend told me, my wife told me, my friend told me. I have this one friend, she's really into skincare, she does all the research. Or I saw my mum using this. There is always a person involved in that recommendations process. And this was one of my earliest learnings when I was doing user interviews before I'd even written a single line of code. And so I knew that even if the recommendations get really, really good, which is the idea with the data that we've built up, leading with this, tell us your skin and boom, here's a recommendation, actually is not how you win the trust of our consumer. What works for us is actually telling them, this is the recommendation because X, Y, and Z people with skin like you have used it. Go click on their diary, look at their profiles and see how they've been using it, what their skin journey is, etc. And so, we've stayed very focused on that as far as the consumer offering, to the extent that we don't even use the word AI, also because our average beauty consumer does not care. That means very, very little to them. And so it kind of distracts from what they're actually getting. On the B2B side, just very quickly, because it's probably not immediately obvious how we monetize on the B2B side, the way that works is we essentially run claims testing or product testing programs for brands. So a brand can come to us, say we're launching a new cream for people with oily acne-prone skin. Can you get us 1,000 women in the UK with this specific skin type, skin color? They can be hyper specific on the demographic information, and we recruit from our community. So it's a win-win-win. Consumers have signed up to a free app and now they get free skincare. All they have to do is use it and be honest. The brand gets access to actually unbiased data that's granular in real time, which is something that they struggle with, which is why as an industry, there's actually very little innovation, because there is basically no feedback loop and no access to data, and we monetize for the service. And so again, it's a question of who you're talking to. And our B2B pitches look very different depending on who we're speaking to. When it is a L'Oreal or a Beiersdorf or a big brand where someone has just said, as you said, everyone, use AI, that's the pitch that works, because they then just say to the manager, hey, we're using AI, and it works. When you're talking to smaller, SMEs, indie brands, players in that sort of size range, it's much more solution focused, again, of how does this actually get me ROI? And AI is very rarely the factor that moves the needle in my B2B sales pitches. Again, investors are a different stakeholder. They love hearing AI. And so for that story, that's where I double down and what works.
I think that's moving on, but still slightly tangential to this point. I think one of the criticisms that was leveled at the ROI paper is that the research was done, actually done before it was published a few months prior. And at that point, the cost per million tokens that these generative AI models were putting out was significantly higher, and that cost has now fallen, in part due to technical reasons like mixture of expert models, but also in part due to venture capital and venture capital funding foundational model providers to basically loss lead per token on the cost that they sell that service of inference to startups at. I think this is probably could turn into a bit of a debate, but yeah, I'm interested to hear as founders, if you consider that. If you do, how do you consider it, and how do you plan for the unit economics of your application or your product when that could change quite significantly in 5 years' time, if once we're hooked on the generative AI, they start turning up the cost, and once the venture dollars start running out, they start having to increase their costs. I imagine, though, that Amble consumes a few tokens with the type of work that you're doing. So I imagine you've considered this a little bit.
No, it's actually like a massive problem for like consumer founders, and like I think there's been like a paradigm shift with AI in the sense that previously when I was at Spotify, for example, like the main metric we would track was retention and engagement. Like we would want users to come in and like use us for longer, and that was like the sort of whole company's rallying point. With AI, when you have that, like the more people consume and like engage and retain, the more you pay for like the sort of tokens or like the foundation models. So there is almost this incentive which founders or like company builders have to have users who pay them but don't use the product. Like that is like the ideal case now, where like your retention curves could look like, you know, extremely bad for an investor, but as long as people pay you up front, that's great. So I think a lot of consumer founders will have to make some hard decisions there, especially because we're in this like world of like ChatGPT and Claude spending tons of money to make sure that everyone gets AI for free, on demand, and like for however much they want. Like the usage limits are so high that most people don't actually cross them. So yeah, I mean, the way I see it is perhaps some time in the future with on-device or like with cheaper models, we'll get to a place where cost per token doesn't really count as much. But for now, it's definitely very top of mind and almost a blocker for a lot of people starting AI companies right now.
And potentially, though, you can guard against this rising cost if you believe that the data assets which underlie your business, which you're able to collect by encouraging user engagement in the short to medium term, give you something which you can then sell back to those AI companies in the longer term. However, that has a load of user privacy and data privacy questions surrounding it. Like, we don't want to end up in another situation where, like with social media, where we just start giving away our data to free via startups, and then this trickling up to the foundational model providers. I imagine, Hannah, that your data is going to be very, very valuable, potentially to some of these foundational model providers. How do you think about collecting that data in an ethical way and ensuring that, yes, you build an asset that can serve you in the future and potentially offset some of the costs that you might incur and that might increase in the future from generative AI, but in an ethical and privacy-preserving way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Even before this boom of Gen AI, when I started the company, data was always central to the whole company business model and our recommendations. But the way I viewed it is that collecting user data isn't a bad thing, in the sense of it's what you do with it that can often be bad. And companies like Meta are essentially selling your attention span to advertisers. So that's, in my view, a net negative to society. I don't agree with this advertising model. And that's the context. That's why they're collecting your user data. What my vision is for Clear is, yes, to help consumers figure out which products to use and whether they're using, but also to help brands actually create better products. The reason the industry is the state that it's in today is because there is no data for brands to actually know, are our products any good? L'Oreal is not going to fund a study with Estee Lauder products in a user's or a consumer's routine. But consumers don't only use L'Oreal or The Ordinary or Estee Lauder. They mix, they match, they try, they buy. The trends move so quickly. So there is no incentive for anybody to commission a study of that scale. And so the solution is, well, the brands that win are the ones with the biggest marketing budget. And who does that hurt the most? That hurts the consumer, because it means that we are buying products that actually, for the most part, do nothing, because there is no infrastructure to test them, because there's no data. And so the way that I viewed it, and maybe this was like the physics background coming in, is, well, the first part to innovation is collecting the data so you can analyze it to be able to innovate. And so I'm actually quite upfront with our users that the way for us to be able to give you better suggestions and also help brands help you is through your data. And of course it's anonymized and, you know, they can't be targeted, but this was the reason that I was very against ads, which is a common monetization stream for a consumer app like ours, and would have been easy revenue per se, but it kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to achieve and is not the kind of company that I wanted to build. And so the way in which we use our data is very, very important to us. And as of now, we don't just sell it to any third party. The way that it's kind of sold is through these specific programs with specific brands, and there's a lot of consents in place. It's almost run like a clinical trial. So it's a little bit different. And so I think for me, I don't see the data collection or collecting user data as a bad thing. And especially a lot of our audience is young women. I like to try and educate them on why data is important in that process of innovation. And it's not something you should blanket be scared of, but you should have an understanding of where it's going and how it's being used. And because of my intentions of building this company, fortunately, I have full control over that at the moment, and do everything in my power to keep it that way.
And then just coming to you, Romain, do you think that maybe it's a positive thing, that actually the cost of these LLMs are too low right now? And when you look at some of how your enterprise clients are using things like MCP or other sort of parts of the infrastructure and the stack, they're quite inefficient currently, and actually increasing costs of large language models might be an accelerator for actually improving some of the technical laziness, so to speak, of what we're seeing in these initial proof of concept systems and stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. And on the topic of cost, I actually just want to quickly react to what you just said. First of all, amazing vision for the company. I love how you're building it. But the reason GDPR exists is because most companies don't think that way, I think. My experience, because when I started the company, one of our differentiators as an integration platform is that we don't store the data. We literally, it transits through our servers, but we don't store anything, right? Personal data, we have salaries, we have social security numbers, we have names, addresses, etc., bank details, all that stuff. And a lot of our competitors do. But what we found is that at the end of the day, especially in your B2B model, and for us, because we're B2B, there is a cost to that privacy. And if you're more than 10, 20% more expensive than the alternative, which I don't believe you are, because there's no good alternative to what you're selling. But when there are, usually privacy is the first thing that is a negotiable, basically. And so just wanted to, I think the way you're building it is awesome. And the fact that you have the possibility to price for that is great. And on the cost of tokens, I think the models are going to get cheaper. I actually don't think the VC money is going to run out too quickly, given how much the foundational model companies have been raising recently. I think it's hard to spend $100 billion in a couple of years. But so let's assume for a minute that it doesn't run out too quickly. There is a race to the bottom on cost of models, right? So it is going to get cheaper to run ChatGPT, etc. But I think it is already unsustainable at the current price for many companies to run they're running at a loss. The application layer companies are already running at a loss. For us, because we're selling B2B, larger contracts, etc., we don't have that problem. And we get rate limited on Anthropic all the time. So we're using heavily the models, right? But I think for B2C applications, I completely agree with your comment that this is unsustainable. And this is part of when the whole bubble busts. I think this is the first thing that's going to go. But so the models are going to get cheaper. I think the second thing is we're going to be using smaller models. Instead of paying the foundational models to host the model for us and pay for their own margin on the inference, we might go straight to a Grok or something like that, and which is just owning the infrastructure, right? And so you can always lower the cost in some ways of inference. But I think ultimately, if you're not making enough money, with that product, just stop running it. It's not a good idea. It doesn't bring value. So I think you do need to optimize it. You do need to figure out a way that it's sustainable.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the things which I've seen a lot of my clients do this year is switch over to a product called OpenRouter, so that they're easily able to switch between foundational model providers as and when they change their cost. And it makes a lot of sense to do that, so that if OpenAI or Anthropic up their costs, You don't have a whole switching cost in terms of having to change the code and things like that. You've just got one API and you just set, okay, well, now we're going to move over to Vertex AI rather than directly using Anthropic if they change the price there. And yeah, certainly like some of the concerns around pricing and if it's going to change, and also the speed that other foundational models have been coming down to beat others on pricing has really driven that switch from going direct to a model provider to going through something like OpenRouter so that you have that flexibility to switch, or also to be able to A/B test a smaller model against a larger model. And I really agree with you that if your company isn't exploring smaller language models now, you probably should do. It's a huge opportunity for lower running costs, but also better outputs, I think. Fine-tuning a smaller model on your proprietary data definitely is a very fruitful angle for lowering costs and getting better user experience and output. On that note, how do we know what is good output from these AI models, but also how do we think about how we create a good environment in which humans and AI can cooperate? And I think so much of building a startup has changed in the last 24 months. Things like your technical ability of your CTO used to be so important, and how fast you can ship code was so fundamental. And generative AI through tools like Cursor, Claude Code, etc., has been an incredible leveler in terms of what technical teams are able to produce. Unfortunately, for technical teams that were really talented, that has taken away some of their edge and enabled people like me, I'm joking, to come in. But what that has led to a rise of is what some people call taste amongst founders, and the importance of a founder having good taste. Now, I think it's important to define what taste is here, because it could be quite a gatekeepy type word. I think when people talk of taste, what they are talking about is certainly a pretty user interface and knowing what looks good from a design perspective, but I think also sort of the human-computer interaction piece of understanding your customer, understanding their workflows, and understanding where AI can fit there well, and that sort of tacit knowledge of understanding who your user is and where they want to see AI. And I think that partly can come from user interviews, but you see founders do very, very well when they're very familiar with the problem that their users are experiencing. So on that note, Ahana, what do you think? I see you as someone that has great taste in terms of your product and what you've been able to put out to the world and understanding your end customer. Are you now seeing from investors more of a focus on your understanding of the problem, your understanding of the end customer? And are you hearing from customers that it is taste which is making your product successful, not having a sub 1 millisecond page load or something like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say is you're the first person ever who said I have good taste. My UX designer would disagree with you. My mum would disagree with you. Most people would disagree, but thank you, I appreciate that.
Maybe I was referring to a UX designer there.
Yeah, my UX designer has great taste. But no, I think, again, it all comes down to just keeping the consumer at the focus of what you're doing. And so I've never thought about it as taste. I've always thought about it as it's a business problem of how do we get people to use the app more. And for us, in the first couple of years, it was all about retention and how do we get people to like it and come back, and whether that's from a UI perspective or how they're interacting with the app and understanding what they're supposed to do. That there are many different facets that go into it. And I wish I could say that I had some unique insight on what taste means to me or how we've executed, but it's just a very tight, boring, data-driven product development process. Our team is super lean. A lot of people don't realize it's just myself and my CTO full-time, and it's us constantly just doing user interviews, looking at the session replays, seeing where the drop-offs are, and just talking to the users. And we're very fortunate that part of the app is a community where people are sharing about their skin concerns, leaving product reviews, asking questions. And one thing that I've always kind of prided myself and our company on is also our customer service. Sounds like a very corporate way of putting it, but how we interact with users. That to us, the app is built by the community to a large extent. So, every feature suggestion, no matter how outlandish it is, gets at least documented, and there is a discussion about it. And as and when it's implemented, we let our users know, and whether we have 5 users or now today if we have 50,000, that process actually hasn't changed with scale. And so I think just having a real focus on product, that's both me and my CTO, we have a physics background, we run the company like a science experiment. So it's constantly about iterating, experimenting. But then, for the specifics of the actual UI, having a great UX designer, and not just in an aesthetic sense, but again, having that fundamental thought about the psychology of your end consumer. Why are they opening the app? Why are they navigating to this tab? And asking yourself a bit deeper, which is something we were forced to do because there is no market-leading skincare app. There was no Strava for skincare as such, so we couldn't just take an app's feature set and just be like, this is the blueprint to success, everyone's gonna love this, which is why I was so focused on retention in the first 3.5 years. Unlike a lot of consumer apps that will just optimize for growth straight away or revenue straight away, I figured that we had the luxury of venture funding from day one, and much to some of my early investors' dismay, I didn't want to spend it on Instagram ads. I wanted to spend it on me and my CTO taking the time to actually build an app that adds value first, which is why we only launched our premium tier a month ago, almost 5 years into this journey, because I just don't believe that any of the big vision for the business would succeed if we didn't have a good product first and foremost. So I've always been guided by product decisions.
And Zoe, has any of this Silicon Valley rebranding of talk to your customer to taste, has that populated your X or Twitter feed? Or have you seen that? And what's your sort of opinion on that? And how does that shape how you're building Amble?
Taste has been honestly top of mind since we started this company, because we started it in an era where AI slop was already a thing. And so we started and we pivoted the company, but initially we started it setting out to build a generative audio platform, which would be backed by artists contributing to the creation of music. So, it's been top of mind and increasingly top of mind as we're seeing, these sort of AI media platforms from Meta and OpenAI come out onto the App Store. I would agree, I think the main way we have approached this problem of taste is really just going down to fundamentals, talking to the customer, knowing who you're building for, and just doubling down on what they actually need. Our specific sort of manifestation of that has been a really simple insight, really, that people don't learn languages just to learn languages. People learn it for a specific use case, and a lot of people learn it for culture. They're interested in the culture of their partner, they're interested in the culture of a country they want to visit or the country they're living in. And if you look at all of the language learning solutions so far, they've treated the words as words without the broader context and broader culture it connects to. So I think that is what we could call taste, despite this being quite a nebulous concept, because ultimately that's what users come to us for, and that's what's different about us compared to everyone else.
We're going to move on to questions in a moment. Just before we do, is there anything else you want to add to that, Romain? I know that you've done some very interesting things to get to know your customers in the developer community in terms of hackathons and also the AI demo days that you've sponsored for some time now. Is that how you understand your customers, through sort of events like that, that's how you sort of get taste?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think for me, it's all about just getting close to the users. The innovation cycles in AI are shorter than they've ever been. If you're building a product in this space, you have to continually change. And generally speaking, I don't think there's anything new in building a product in generative AI to building a regular product. You just need to stay close to your users and make sure you're solving an actual problem. We'll come at the end when we do the round of, in case there's anywhere people can download your apps and things like that. But we'll now move on to questions.
Working in the beauty space for over 20 years, the question goes to you. And one remark for everyone here, I don't know how familiar you with the beauty industry. All the claims on the products need to be scientifically tested. And if they're not true, they're going to be sued. I've been in the room where Beiersdorf sued L'Oreal for product claims, and L'Oreal fought back. And we're talking billions in the industry. So they don't want to eat each other's breakfast. The main question about the tools that you're building is obviously the question, where does the training data come from? Because if you have a red skin, it could be because the skin is hydrated or there's a medical condition. If you then put that through those 32 different skin tones of the Fitzpatrick scale, you need to have 64 cases just for this little question.
Yeah.
So your competitors are working with 10,000s of data sets just to train the model, even before releasing it. So the question is, where did you get your training data from? And
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is there was no AI recommendations in the first version of the app or in the second or the third. That feature and that part of the app only came once we had sufficient data. And it was actually that insight that I shared earlier that the user kind of actually doesn't care where the recommendation comes from in the first place, which is what we doubled down on, is the fact that actually the simplest version of the app that we can ship is a skincare diary where users are tracking what's working for them or what they're using, doesn't have to be working, taking pictures so that they can see, and actually just being able to manually find other people with skin like them. And that was the first version of the app. There was no fancy algorithm that made any recommendations. It was as simple as, the real life analogy being you've got a friend with similar skin, you look into their bathroom cabinet.
So this means that you didn't work with dermatologists, basically, because this is what the others are doing. They're working with dermatologists and
once we built our recommendations algorithm, yes. So we have a partnership with Imperial's Dermatology Society, and we have ongoing dermatologists who make sure nothing too wacky is coming out. But at the end of the day, we aren't here to give dermatologist recommendations. These are all cosmetic products that are available on the market. All we're doing is using the evidence and the data of what's working and what's not.
And just one congratulations, because you're really one of the few tools who are brand agnostic.
Yes.
Because all your competition, they go to the brands and then they've been put on the brand website. So you're really one of the few who actually goes across the brands.
Yeah, and that's, again, very intentional, partly to, achieve the mission that I want. But even from a defensibility perspective, if we were to work exclusively with just one brand, L'Oreal has more resources than we do, right? So they can easily build a tracking app. The thing that keeps us safe from these larger players is the fact that we're brand agnostic and can actually create this data set as well. So it's not just an altruistic mission of mine, it's also that this is how we protect ourselves and build our own data set.
So really, coming on from that, first of all, congratulations to all of you. It's just great to see these exciting companies start up and the sort of energy when you talk about them. So I'm a brand expert, so I'm interested in how you believe today you can build your brands in the digital ecosystem internationally. Do you believe in marketing? Do you believe in just getting citations and getting really good AI search going? I'd love to hear your views on really how to build startup brands today. And second, quite related question, and you might be able to answer this too. Have you come across any really exciting brand building or marketing startups that could advise some of Britain's best brands into kind of how to use AI technology? Because I think there's a lot of great brands we don't want to see get lost whilst the big brands go in there with all the budget.
I'll just jump in quickly with just a couple of thoughts on that. I think the main thing that I'm seeing change is this focus on community and having a community around your brand and actually playing an active role in fostering the community. And maybe Stack One can talk about that because they do a great job of it in London. And the second, which also answers your second point, some of the communities in London that are building with AI right now are truly incredible. There's one called Unicorn Mafia, which is probably not the best name, but the work that they are doing with university students that are building with the latest technology in London is amazing. They are flying people across the world, the most talented builders in London across the world to build for some of the world's biggest brands. And doing a sort of these, they're calling it hackathons as a service for some of the world's biggest brands in the FTSE 100 and beyond is incredible, because number one, they're giving young students and entry-level people who are having a lot of their jobs taken by coding assistants. They're giving them a chance to show what they can do with coding assistants and show that they can actually outmaneuver the large outsourced software teams that they have and deliver a proof of concept in a matter of hours. I think that's a really good way of they're building a brand, but then they're also working with companies like OpenAI to show what's possible with this technology, and that's therefore reinforcing the brand of OpenAI and some of the other startups.
Yeah. Are we okay for time?
Yeah, I think this might be the last question. One more.
Okay.
Great panel. I have two very quick questions, I promise. And my father's always had skin issues, so I think maybe you and I need to have a chat. I guess first question is, what do you guys think of the statement, regulation stifles innovation? And secondly, what advice would you give to upcoming entrepreneurs, so the students of the future, wanting to go into AI or non-AI, that you can leverage from your experience? Thank you.
I didn't hear the first question.
What do you think of the statement, regulation stifles innovation?
Oh, right. Yeah. I don't mind taking that one.
Yeah, and if you want to finish up on the community work.
Oh, the community. Oh, yeah. Just really quickly on the
brand
brand thing. Brand, I think you can win in a market with a inferior product if you have better distribution. It's not new. I didn't make this up, but I really strongly believe it, especially as a second-time founder. We focus so heavily on distribution. And in generative AI, where it's so crowded, there's so much noise, there's so much similarity between different products, you need to have a strong brand. And having a strong brand means having strong positioning, strong messaging. So we invested, my fifth hire was a designer, because we wanted to look more polished. We started AI Demo Days, which is an event series that we've run in London, Stockholm, San Francisco, and Paris, to attach our brand to bigger companies and kind of signal and share communities and kind of spread the message and the mission. I think it's really important. I don't think there's any new things in AI other than there's a lack of personality, I think, of a lot of B2B brands, including, to be honest, Stack Ones. And that's something that I think in general, companies like PostHog, you were asking for examples. PostHog is one of my favorite brands. They have a hedgehog as their brand. It's just, they're very different. I think there's a way to really differentiate yourself even with your brand. So to answer your question, I think it's a really good point though, because American companies tend to shout a lot more about their products and build better brands. And I think in Europe, we have the opportunity to learn that. And then to answer maybe your question on regulation. So I was a head of data when GDPR started initially, and I remember how complex it made it. And we did feel like it was making us under competitive compared to our competitors in the US, right? But at the end of the day, I think it creates a new market. I don't think it stifles innovation. I think it just creates a new market, because regulation compliance means compliance. Compliance means spend, right? So if you just figure out a way that you can use the regulation in a positive way, I think that's the real outcome here. And I think we should be thankful for regulators a lot of the time, because I also was working in marketing technology and data at the time, and I was horrified by the way the data was being used. That's why I actually resonate a lot with what you were saying. So I don't believe it stifles innovation. I think it does make companies under competitive if you're not playing in a level playing field. But if you're selling to European customers or to customers in a regulated market, everyone has to comply, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's needed. And advice to founders, I think for me, at least my advice, which is maybe the advice I give to most founders, is the co-founder you pick it's the most, I think we talked about it today, is the most important decision that you're going to make for your company. So take your time, work. Like if you don't feel like you have a good co-founder to build with, like go back to work, go do something else until you meet someone that you really feel like you could build with, to go through highs and lows. And that is what has served me, I think, the most. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think very quickly on like the innovation and regulation piece, I also think like regulation makes sure that like innovation can actually be adopted. Like you're not going to use a product you don't feel sure about or secure about, and like you're not going to trust the company selling you that product to tell you that it's safe. So I think in a lot of ways it creates a market by having good regulation in place.
Yeah.
I think like on the like just founding advice, like I went through this like fairly differentiated accelerator in Silicon Valley, which is called South Park Commons. And there is a lot of advice which like accelerators give you around like how to take something from 0 to 1. There is like even a book written on it. Their whole thesis is around how can we take people from -1 to 0, which is essentially like when you found a company, you generally have 5 or 6 different ideas floating around in your brain, like even before, right? Like you could work on so many different things. How do you find that one thing which you can dedicate the next 10 years of your life to, even before you find that one person you can do it with? So I think just general advice I would say is like take time to stay in that -1 to 0 phase, like explore, see what actually interests you enough to spend like 5 or 10 years of your life doing that.
Yeah, I think if I could also just add on to that final point, I'm a solo founder, so I think actually that there are 2 points that I'll make here, and the first is actually related to Harvey, what we were speaking about just before the panel, which is I think there is often a lot of groupthink in the startup ecosystem, people looking on their X feeds or LinkedIn and seeing what other founders are doing. By definition, you're kind of already an outlier, so applying average principles probably will not get you anywhere. And so, as that pertains to even if it is a co-founder or not, I was told constantly that I needed a co-founder. And so in the end, like it was a bit of a disaster, but I just messaged like the people in my year with the highest grades, and I was like, who wants to do this? And obviously it didn't end well, just testament to why you should make a proper decision. And so the fact was, though, that I could actually do it myself. And I kind of knew that from the start, but because I constantly had this messaging of this is how you're meant to do it, I kind of felt pressured into one way. And then, when I raised my first funding round, investors were like, okay, like, pay an influencer, do ads, like do this and that, which is the standard trajectory for a consumer app like ours. And by this point, I'd acquired a little bit of wisdom, which was to actually say no. Like, yes, I appreciate that's what all of these other companies have done, but actually thinking from first principles, is this the correct decision for my business? I am the one that spends all day, every day thinking about these business challenges, and I actually don't believe that these people know better than I do. They may have excelled in other areas. They'll be giving advice from the best of places based on their experiences, but ultimately, I think learning to trust my own judgment and not indexing so heavily on more experienced people's advice was something that I think, especially to young founders, people starting early who are looking for mentors, I think that's a great thing. Ask questions, but don't expect that just because someone has had a title or been a founder longer than you, they have all the answers, because if it was that easy, then everyone would have a successful company. And I think the second point I want to touch on very quickly is just a message of resilience, that even the best founder will find their job hard because it's hard. It's testament to the fact that the job is hard, not that you're bad, not that your company's bad. And I think often, we expect things to go one way. We often hear the success stories, or, we hear inflated metrics that people are posting on social media. I was at one of my friend's app launches last week, and he was really upset. He was like, I only got 100 downloads today. And I'm like, is that good or bad? And he was like, no, it's terrible. Like, we invested, so investors want to see X, Y, Z. And if investors or even founders knew how hard it is for a new app to get 1 download, I could guarantee that everyone would be celebrating with 100. People that haven't or have actually got a lot of downloads are either lying or have hemorrhaged money on ads. And these are the 2 options, neither of which are good options. So I think just adjusting your expectations, focus on doing the right thing, focusing on what's within your control, expecting it to be a hard journey, expect rejections, failure, all the rest of it, and try and reframe it as a sign that actually, if you're finding things hard, it's because it is hard and you're actually on the right track. Yes.
It is like chewing glass, I can confirm.
It's way harder.
I will wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Massive thanks to Cassidy as well.